Hey everybody, and welcome to Flipped, where I take soulful samples that I've composed and turn them into hip-hop instrumentals so we can all have a good time and nod our heads. My name is Kyle, but I make music under the name BAP, and that's how you can find me on all these apps that we can't seem to get away from. This is the first episode, so I'm really excited to dive in. Today, I'm going to be showing you how I flipped a composition that I made called Counterbalance into a beat called Morning Routine. So thanks for pulling up, and let's get to it. All right, so again, the sample that we're flipping today is a sample that I made as part of my Soul in Pieces Volume 1 series, and it's called Counterbalance. It's a really melodic sample with sort of a vintage kind of vibe to it. So I put this composition together using a few things here in my room, my piano, my Rhodes, bass, a synth lead, and a celeste. If you want to see piece by piece how I composed the sample, feel free to check out this video. All right, so let's take a listen to the sample. Now, creating samples is one of my favorite things to do musically, but my favorite thing to do musically is to flip samples. But before we flip this sample, we're gonna actually start by chopping it up. There are so many ways to chop samples. There's no real right or wrong answer, but for me, there's no better way for me to chop samples than with a physical hardware sampler. And there are any number of these devices on the market, and by and large, they're all pretty excellent. I mean, I've chopped samples using a mouse, a trackpad, using a QWERTY keyboard, a MIDI keyboard. And for me, nothing really beats the feel and the function of having a hardware sampler that corresponds to your software. All right, so once I've got the sample loaded up, I chop it up across the pads of my sampler. And this is usually in quarter note or eighth note increments. Or sometimes I just use my ear and chop whatever I'm hearing in the sample. In this particular case, I chopped this sample into quarter notes, and then I just kind of played around until I came across an idea that I thought felt the most musical. Now, what I'm about to say might sound a little strange, but just stick with me. After I chop the sample and play around with it a bit to get the idea that I want, I actually don't record it. I just leave it right there and I move on. I actually move over to the drums. I know getting an idea and not capturing it might sound a little strange, but the reason I do this is because after I've played around and kind of grab the idea that I want, I actually like to start all of my tracks on the drums. For a lot of us who make hip hop, the vibe and the feel of our music often comes from the drums. And so they're kind of like the heartbeat of the music that we like to make. So while the idea is fresh in my head, I like to just go ahead and start working on how I want the track to feel. This makes it a bit more natural for me whenever I go back and record the sample on top of the drums. And another reason for me is by waiting until I have the drums fully programmed, it actually gives me an opportunity to kind of test my idea once I come back over to record the sample to see if that's still the right vibe, or am I feeling something different now that I've kind of got all the drums laid out. You do you. It's not for everybody, but that's the way I get down. So we move over to the drums group of our sampler. Let's take a listen to the drums and hear how they sound. I programmed these drums using a combination of a few different loops. The feel is pretty heavily eighth note driven. It's bouncy. The snare is getting a lot of help reinforcing the backbeat from like a tambourine, and also something flammy. I don't really know what it is, but it's flammy and it's nice. And there's also sort of a triplet thing happening with the tops that's giving it like a really bouncy swing, and I'm into it. But all of this whole vibe makes me want to keep the track pretty positive and kind of feel good, like a, toss your head back, close your eyes vibe kind of thing. All right, so with those drums in mind, we now make our way back over to our sample group to start recording the idea that I had initially. And again, the drums made me want to keep this thing pretty positive, pretty upbeat, pretty light. So here's what I ended up laying down. All right, so you can start to hear that the drums and the sample are providing a really, really nice foundation for us. but I do think it's a little bit boring. We can bring the track to life a little bit more, I think. So, to do that, I'm going to add some things. And what I ended up adding was an arpeggio, some vocal chops, and some bird sounds. They're all things that at various points I think are going to breathe a little life into the track and give it some nice texture and color as well. So now that I have all the elements that are going to make up my beat, I'm ready to pull everything into my DAW. So when I arrange and I mix, I like to have control over everything individually. So when I'm going from my sampler to my DAW, I'll export and import them all separately, like one element at a time. Or if I feel there are like too many things to kind of click and drag a bunch of times, then I'll batch export each thing as an individual track in my DAW. Now, I don't think this is the right video for me to kind of dive into like deep mixing techniques, but I will give you some of the essentials for me. So like I said, each thing that I programmed in my beat gets its own track in my DAW. And my DAW offers tape saturation for each individual track as part of its larger built-in tape emulation system. So I know a lot of us today are really obsessed with like warmth and tape saturation and tubes and all of that. And I think there's a reason for that. A lot of those classic records that we all love and kind of grew up on, at least for me, whether you call it the dinosaur age or the golden age of recording, every channel back then would get recorded through a tape machine. So that's the approach that I take in my DAW as well. I apply tape saturation to every channel, whether it's tracks, instrument buses, and even the mix bus as well. Now, I usually mix top down, starting with subtle changes to the mix bus and then somewhat moderate changes to the instrument buses, and then kind of more drastic changes to the individual tracks if I need to. So after everything has been arranged and mixed, then I'll just add a few small mastering processes if I'm not sending this track off to a mastering engineer. This is usually like just minor EQ, a little bit of stereo width, some saturation, and then compression, and then of course like leveling. And that is it. I really like this one. It came out really nice. The drums gave us that bounce, and then the sample was soulful enough to give us something to really vibe to. The vocals also give it a really nice lift and keep it upright. Oh, and don't forget my birdie sounds. Give it a little nature and a little nurture, a little planet Earth vibe. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to hit play and let the music take us out. And while the music is playing, that's a really good time for you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and of course, leave a comment. If you're feeling it, let me know. Throw me a comment or just your favorite emoji. Now, if you hear something or see something that can make me better, let me know that too. I want to be good like you. All right, fam. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.